Well, good morning, everybody. It's really great to be back here with you again. And I hope that we'll have both some fun this morning, even though the message itself is going to be very challenging. It's going to be challenging for at least two reasons. Number one, the words in Matthew 5 that I have been given to speak on are, by their very nature, very challenging words. So the message is challenging. Secondly, I found out what words I'd be speaking on a few days ago after I'd left to fly over here. And so it will be challenging for me as well, as we just look and go into this together. I can remember just after my wife and I first got married, one of the pieces of advice that I was given by the couple that sort of spent time with us, preparing us for marriage, was they said, look, even if one of you isn't tired, make it a habit to always go to bed about the same time, because you very often have important conversations late at night when you're tired, and you'll talk about things. And then even if one of you later gets up, to make a cup of tea, or read or whatever it is, at least you wouldn't have missed that opportunity to have this deep conversation with each other. And so we both gone to bed, and my wife was very tired. She'd fallen straight asleep, and I wasn't tired, and I thought I'll read. So I was sat up in bed reading. And we were living in England at that point, in the north of England. It gets very cold, and because the house was also cool, and I was sat up reading, my arms and so on, I was getting cold too. And I read a couple of chapters of this book that I was enjoying, and then I finished reading. I turned off the light, and then I rolled over and I put my cold arm, around my wife Anne. And at this point, she just froze. I could feel her just go incredibly stiff, and she grabbed my arm, yelled the word snake, and then threw it away like that. I'm still having counseling for the rejection I suffered that night. Now, one of the complications that we have when we read this passage in Matthew 5 from verses 27 down to 30 is when we read these words, they come across as being very, very strong. And it's important, I think, even as we start thinking about this, is to remember, what does it mean for us to live a fully dedicated life as Christians? Because I find it fascinating that if you ask people to close their eyes and imagine an uncompromised Christian, a Christian who lives without compromise, and you say to people, what does such a person look like? Everyone immediately imagines someone who is hard, who is tough, who's difficult to be with, who's maybe saying difficult, hard things. But it's amazing. In Galatians 5:22, we're told that the fruit of the Spirit that should mark out the Christian's life is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. So let us not be compromised about that. Let us live fully uncompromised lives which are filled with these things. May this fruit be the most evident thing in our life to everybody else. We can't afford, as Christians, not to live in the way that we're being asked to. Now, instead of giving an exposition out of Matthew chapter 5 from verses 27 to 30, maybe we'll read them. What we'll do is I would like to try and give you a package around it. And at the end of the service, we'll look at those words again. And I hope that the description we would have put around this passage will mean that when you read it again, you'll be able to do so with fresh eyes. But this is Jesus speaking, and he's speaking to his disciples, and the crowds are listening in. But when you remember, if you read the beginning of chapter 5, it says that Jesus went up onto a mountainside, and the disciples came, sat at his feet, and he taught his disciples. But the crowds also want to know what he's sitting. So now the crowds are listening to what Jesus is saying to his followers. And then by the time we get halfway through the first part of what Jesus is saying, he says this: "You have heard it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I tell you, anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. Well, these are incredibly strong words. And the question is, how do we understand them? A little while ago, a couple of months ago, my eldest daughter sent me the words of a song. She said, "Dad, all of my friends were listening to this song right now." She said, "And I thought you'd be really interested to read it." And the song is entitled More Than Words. Just listen to what they say. "Saying I love you are not the words I want to hear from you. It's not that I want you not to say, but if you only knew how easy it would be to show me how you feel, more than words is all you'll have to do to make it real. Then you wouldn't have to say you love me, because I would already know. What would you do if my heart was torn in two? More than words to show how you feel, that your love for me is real. What would you say if I took those words away, and then you couldn't make things new just by saying, I love you?" You see what the song is saying? You keep telling me and saying the words to me, "I love you." And they're the words you speak to me to make everything right. But I'm looking for something more than words. I'm looking somehow to see something in you that means even if those words weren't spoken, I would know they were true. What would you do if those words were taken from you? You could no longer use those three words. What could you do when my heart itself is torn apart, torn in two? What could you do then to show me how you feel and that what you actually feel is real? It's an incredible song. I can understand why it's so popular, because it's asking a question that anyone who's ever experienced any form of heartbreak can relate to and understand. We are so desperate to experience meaning in our life, and because from our experience we know that there are some forms of meaning that we only experience in relationship, we find ourselves hungering and chasing after relationships in order to feel fulfilled and feel that sense of meaning and that excitement in our house and in our life, and we will do anything to get them. And that's the problem, because then we run into three basic problems, and those are the problems I want to talk to you right now. The first one is that we convince ourselves that we can have love without truth. Our first major problem is we think we can have love without truth. It has become so common to separate out love and truth. And very often people defend themselves and they'll say something like this: "Well, look, I'm really interested in the truth, and that's why I speak to you like the way I do." And, and that's actually very, very important, because they think of truth as being separate from love. And then you have other people who say, I couldn't say something like that to somebody because, love is so important to me and I want to be kind and gentle. And we all the time pitch love and truth against each other, thinking that somehow we need to choose which kind of person we want to be. But that option simply isn't given to us. And the fallaciousness of this reasoning can be simply demonstrated with one simple question. When someone comes to you and says, "I love you," does it matter if they're telling you the truth or not? When we speak the words, "I love you," whether they are true or not changes everything about them. We can't, in any meaningful way, experience love in the absence of truth. We need the presence of it to know what it really is. Now, the second thing that we make here is we also think we can experience love without commitment. Now, that is also impossible. I have no idea how Hollywood, when it does its marriages on screen, or the film marriages, if they're getting married, you'll see the scene at the end, and one person, the guy officiating at the wedding, it's not normally a minister anymore, it's just often a friend or something like that, will say, "Do you take this person to be your wife, your husband, whatever?" And the person replies, "I do." Except those words have never been part of any Christian liturgy to do with marriage at any point in history or time. That has never been the question. It doesn't matter what denomination you're from, what background you're from, or how far through the millennia you go. That is never the question. The question has always been, will you take this person to be your lawfully wedded wife, husband? And the person responds, "I will." When you say I do, that's a statement of fact. When you say I will, that is a commitment that you're making to them. You're saying, I will love you. Whatever happens, whatever befalls me, whatever may go wrong, I will be there for you. I am making that commitment to you. My wife and I, when we were first married, living up in the north of England, we were asked to run a small youth group. We didn't particularly want to take it on. I don't see it as my primary skill set. But here they were, this group of teenagers. 13 teenagers aged between 13 and 17, and they were all women. 100% female youth group. It is the most terrifying audience I have ever spoken to on a consistent basis in my entire life. And a few months ago, I was meeting with some of the Boko Haram in northern Nigeria. So believe me, I have some context to that. This audience was scary to me. On the very first day we ever had a meeting together, I gave all of them a blank piece of paper and a pen. And I said, I want you to find a quiet place in this room, and I want you to write down on this piece of paper everything you'd like to talk about in these meetings. So everybody went away on their own, and they took 5 minutes, and they wrote down what did they want to talk about, and I gathered in all the pieces of paper. Now, after they'd all gone, I sat down and I read through these pieces of paper, and there was only one question which appeared on every single piece of paper. Do you know what it is? The only question they all asked was, what is love? Why get married? You fall in love, you get married. You fall out of love, you get divorced. Why bother getting married in the first place? What is love? Define it for us. Now, that's not an easy question to answer. Philosophers for thousands of years have struggled to define love properly. I said to my wife, I promised them I would answer the most commonly asked question they asked, and this is it. And I had no idea what to do. So I fasted and prayed for 5 days because I was just begging God, please give me one thing to share with these people. So a week later, when they all came back and we all sat down in a big circle, I said to them, I want you to do the following thing with me. I all want you to close your eyes, and they all closed their eyes. And then I said, I would like you to imagine that tomorrow you go to school and the boy you like the most comes up to you and says, I love you. How do you feel? And every face was like this. They were the happiest looking group of people you've ever seen in your entire life. And then while they still had their eyes closed and they're all smiling away, I said, now I want you to imagine that the following day you go back to the same school and the same boy comes up to you and says, I love you. Now, and the same boy goes up to your best friend and says, I love you. Now how do you feel? Every smile disappeared. And I asked them to open their eyes, and I said, you see, the words I love you are meaningful because they are given exclusively and committedly to you. Outside of that moral framework of exclusivity and commitment, those words mean nothing. That's why a very famous group of British philosophers called the Spice Girls wrote a song a long time ago in which the chorus said, don't tell me you love me, just tell me you'll be there. Well, what's that about? It's about commitment. It's about saying everybody's willing to say, I love you to us, to become our friend, or maybe even to sleep with us. But the question I have is, will you be there? Will you actually be there for me? The words, I love you, outside of a framework of commitment are meaningless. That is what makes them meaningful. The idea that we experience love without commitment is impossible. That's what makes real friendship real. Look, there are people we're friends with because it's easy and we just sort of get along, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But there are other friends we have and we're committed to them. Even when it isn't easy, when times are hard, when it's not convenient, we're still there for them. We want to spend time for them. Not because it's just easy for us, but because we're close to them, we're committed. It is impossible to experience any form of deep love in this world unless you're prepared to be committed to that person. It's impossible. This is why some Christians find their walk with God itself is even disappointing. They're happy to call on God so long as it's convenient, but there is no commitment to actually be there consistently with Him. And if you're here this morning and you feel that the current of love is running shallow through your heart, I would encourage you just to look at the levels of your commitment and who you're committed to. We can't have and we cannot experience love without commitment. Now, the last point, which I'm going to spend a lot more time on, is may sound a little confusing at first, so you're going to have to bear with me while I actually get to it. But we've talked about love without truth being impossible. We've talked love without commitment being impossible. But also love without persons is impossible. Now, what on earth do I mean by that? Now, I'm going to have to back up a little bit and then work towards this last point for you to be able to understand the significance of it, because this is possibly one of the most pressing issues that we face around the world right now. Very often, as I travel around the world, I get asked to speak on the question of suffering. And the question will go something like this: Michael, you say that there's a God of love, and you claim to worship a God of love, and I see so much pain and suffering in this world. How's that possible? You probably had that question as well. You probably thought about it. Now, it may seem strange at this point to start to talk a little bit about suffering, but let me come back to something I said at the beginning. If you've experienced real love in your heart, and you know what it is for your heart to be broken, it is not at all difficult for you to understand, even in your own experience, that there somehow seems to be a very close experiential relationship between love, deep love, and pain. It's not that one causes the other, but somehow you break one and the other comes flooding in, even in an overwhelming sense. Why is that? Why is that? Well, the way the Bible starts in Genesis is it tells us that a loving God created a loving world. God actually wanted to create life in such a way that you and I could experience and express love. The idea of a lifeless love or a loveless life is terrifying to all of us. None of us want that. It's not that we exist or want to exist. We need something more than that. We want to experience and express love in our life. And this loving God created a world in which love is capable of meaningful expression and experience. And so that is exactly the kind of world that God created. Now, we have to ask ourselves, therefore, what does it mean to create a world in which love can be experienced? You heard me just now introduced very generously by Paul and very kindly. And he pointed out Jim Wigglesworth, who is travels with me as I go around the world and make sure I don't get lost. All I can do is stand up here and speak. Anything practical, that's what he does. I make promises, he has to keep them. So let's supposing while I'm talking to you, I invite Jim to come and stand on me. Stand on me. That may be funny. Stand next to me on this platform. And so Jim comes up and he stands next to me on the platform. And I look at him and I say, you know, Jim, I'm feeling a little bit lonely. You know how much I've been away from the family recently, and I didn't get a good night's sleep last night, which is true. And I really feel that I want to have someone tell me how much they love me. And as I say that to him, I pull a loaded gun out of my pocket and I pull back the firing pin so it clicks into position. I hold the gun to his head and I say, Jim, do you love me? Now, what do you think he will say? Yes. How will he say it? With passion? Maybe with tears. Maybe he will fall down on his knees and declare his undying love and affection for me. Now, let's supposing you go home after this morning service and a friend of yours who isn't a Christian says, oh, you went to church. What happened there today? And you say, you know, it was pretty much the same. We sang, but something unusual happened when this guy was speaking to us in the morning. His assistant came up on the platform while he was speaking, fell on his knees and declared his undying love and affection for the speaker. Now, would it or would it not make a difference to them if they knew a gun was pointed to his head at the time? The words, I love you, are meaningful because they are freely given. You cannot force it. You cannot make it. It is meaningful because it is given without that kind of compulsion. Imagine one day you go to visit your best friend. I don't know who your best friend may be, the person you're closest to. And while you're visiting your best friend, you You knock on the door, there's no answer, but the door's open, so you just walk into their house. And as you walk into the house, you hear your best friend talking to your parents. And as your parents are talking to your best friend, your parents are handing over hundreds of thousands in money to them, saying, thank you so much for being a best friend to my son, to my daughter. We will continue to pay you every week so long as you're kind to them. And your parents leave the back door. And now your best friend comes to you and goes, hey, it's great to see you. How do you feel? You know, we so often talk about love, but we so rarely give thought to what does it actually require? What does it actually mean to be able to experience and express love in this world? What it requires for us to experience and express love in this world is we lead a world in which we have the capacity to love, but we also have the freedom to do it. We have the ability to give it or to withhold it. And any love which is either demanded at force or through money or anything else or any other form of inducement isn't real. And so this loving God created a loving world, and he gave it that kind of capacity and that kind of freedom to make it genuine. So first of all, we have to understand at least that about love. But then there's a second thing that we need to understand about love, which is the freedom which makes love meaningful doesn't mean doing whatever we want, however we want, whenever we want to. Freedom is not doing that. In a society where people do whatever they want, whenever they want, however they want, that is not freedom, that is anarchy. And there are some parts of the world I go to where I get invited to speak, where there's wars and untold evil going on and all kinds of terrorism activity. People are doing whatever they want, however they want, whenever they want, to whomever they want to. But those societies don't experience more freedom. Those societies experience less of it. Freedom is a moral concept. It only exists in a moral framework. You take that framework away, you don't have more freedom, you have less of it. And a loving God created a loving world. He gave it freedom to experience and express love, and at the same time gave it a moral framework to protect and preserve that freedom. I don't know if any of you have ever read the beginning of the book of Isaiah, but in Isaiah chapter 1, there's a really fascinating little passage, which the first time I read really made me think this is interesting. I wonder why it's phrased like this. And this is what it says. It says, woe to you, sinful nation, your guilt is great, you're a brood of evildoers, children given to corruption. They have forsaken the Lord, spurned the Holy One of Israel, and turned their backs on him. Why should you be beaten anymore? Why do you persist in rebellion? Your whole head is injured, your whole heart afflicted. From the sole of your foot to the top of your head, there's no soundness in you, only wounds and welts and open sores. You ever read that? Does it sound angry to you? The first time I read it, I can remember thinking, these are very strange questions. Did you notice the questions? Why do you want to be beaten? Why do you persist in rebellion? I mean, these are strange questions. Have you ever noticed that sometimes parents ask their children strange questions? Have you noticed that? Parents say to their children, do you want a smack? As if a child would sit for a minute and then think, yeah, actually, could I have two? I mean, what a strange question. But these are not strange questions. What's going on in that passage in Isaiah? God is looking at his people and he's saying, I have given you this moral law to protect you, to preserve you, so you can enjoy relationship with each other. And you're breaking it. And as you break it, look what's happening. Look, has anyone ever lied to you? Have you ever been cheated by a friend? Have you ever been betrayed? Did it hurt? Every time we break this law that God has given us for our freedom, we experience pain. God isn't angry in Isaiah chapter 1. He's coming to his people and he's pleading with them. He's saying, why do you want to be beaten? Why do you want to be broken? Why do you want to suffer? Look at the pain you're going through. Look at how you feel within. Just look at the heartbreak. Look at the physical consequences it's happening to you. Look what it's doing to your town. Look how it's made people against each other. Look what it's doing in your nation. How people are hating each other and destroying each other. Look what's being torn down and broken. Why would you persist in that? God is saying. Why? He is pleading with them. He's begging them. He's saying, I have given you something which should be beautiful and should somehow protect and preserve you. And yet we're going against it. And so many of us in this room this morning, our lives are broken. There's a lot of brokenness and pain in this room. I don't need to be a prophet to know that. I just need to read the newspaper. We're not any different from each other. We've experienced this brokenness. We've experienced this pain. We've hurt other people. People have hurt us. We've even hurt ourselves. And we're living with that brokenness all the time, and it's around us everywhere. And God actually cares. He actually wants something to change. A couple of years ago, I was invited to do a series of interviews on BBC local radio. And what they do, I think it was on a Sunday morning, if I remember correctly, you basically sit in a studio, and I can't remember how many local radio stations there are in the UK, but the BBC has like a national service, and then every county has its own radio. And they interview you for 20 minutes, and then you switch. So you start at 6:30 in the morning, you finish, I think, at 9:30 in the morning, and you appear on every local radio station in the nation. And they just, one at a time, every time a different interviewer. And the reason that they wanted to have the interview is they said, look, we want to ask you the question, has the faith community got it right? And the reason they wanted to ask me that question was that the UK had just done something called the NatSal survey. Now, this is one of the largest surveys to do with sexual activity and sexual health that's done in the world. It takes years to complete. They interview tens of thousands of people. They take all of their answers. They put it into a big chart, and then they publish it. And the NatSal survey had just been published. They do it once a decade. 10 years earlier, one of the questions the government decided to ask in its national survey was, do you think adultery is a big issue? And the overwhelming majority of respondents said, no, it really doesn't matter. Adultery doesn't matter. It's not a big issue. It's not important. That year, 10 years later, when they repeated the survey, this time, a clear majority of the national population said, yes, it does matter. And the BBC was asking the question, why has the nation changed their mind? Has the church been right all along? And so all of these radio presenters, one by one, would put me on the air on live radio and say, what's happened? Why do you think we've got this result? And the answer I was giving in one level was very, very simple. I said, when we talk about having a faithful friend, we mean someone who keeps their promises. It's someone we can rely on. When we talk about having a faithful spouse, it's someone who made promises and they keep them. But when that faith is broken, when we suddenly discover that our friend, our lover, our spouse has been faithless, we feel broken inside. We experience hurt. We experience pain. And when you've experienced that pain, you begin to conclude, this isn't good. And I said, that's all this survey is telling you. You have told everybody it really doesn't matter if you betray someone else. And people have experienced it, and now they've experienced the pain. They're saying, actually, this does matter. It hurts. We live in a broken world. All of us, we are broken. The trouble is it's deeper than that. I started off this third point by saying, love exists between persons. You need two people to experience and express love. Now, I know there are some men who wake up in the morning, they put gel in their hair, they smile at themselves and go, I'm in love. But that's sad, because you need two people to experience and express love. I mean, we talk about loving our car or loving our house, but you can't actually technically do that. Love exists between two people. You need two of them. And they experience and express love to each other. The thing is that when we break God's moral law, when we sin, it's not just that we've done something outside of ourselves, we also begin to do something inside ourselves as well. Jesus says this is especially true when it comes to our sexual activity. we actually begin to lose something within us. A couple of years ago, I was speaking in the US, and I got taken to the Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, which I think is it's just been rebuilt. And since I was speaking in the city, they said, you need to go and see the Civil Rights Museum, which celebrates the work of Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement in the US. And my father happened to be with me on this trip, and we went to the museum together. And I'll never forget at one point looking at my father, and he had tears streaming down his face. And he was looking at this giant poster they had, this giant picture. And the picture was of a group of men coming out of a rubbish collection point, and they were going on strike. They were going to stop collecting rubbish and garbage. But the reason they were going on strike wasn't for more money. They weren't striking to get more cash. Each of the men was wearing a sign around their neck, a big square white sign with 4 letters written in black on it, which said, I am a man. This was a group of people going on strike to be recognized as being a human being. That's what they wanted. Recognize me as a human being. I am just as much a human being as everyone else and the rest of you. The incredible thing about sin is it makes us less than what we are. It reduces us. I don't know if you ever had the tragic situation in the Philippines where some child gets kidnapped and the parents will come on TV and they'll appeal to the kidnappers, please return our child. And the police will be there with them and they have a press conference. Every so often, sadly, when you live in the West, in the UK, in the US, you'll see one of these press conferences. I'm sure it's happened here too. The parents, however, are told something very interesting. Before they appear on national TV, they will be briefed. And the police will tell them, when you talk about your child, don't say, my child, or our kid. Use their name. Use their name. Say, we love Michael. Michael is our son. We want Michael back. Please don't hurt Michael. And they will tell them and coach them to use their name. Why? Because even if you're a psychopath, it is harder to kill a person than an object. And what they're trying to do is put the name in the head of the person who'll be watching. So they now think of this child as a person. And it will be that much harder for them to kill them. It will take even if it just buys them a couple of hours or a couple of days, it gives the police that much more time to find the person who's taken the child. Because the psychopath will look not at that as a person, but as an object, a toy that they can play with. Like a cat might play with a mouse or with a ball. They're trying to get you to think of them as a person. The incredible thing is that sin reduces human beings out of persons into objects. We make ourselves less than where we are. When Adam and Eve rebelled against God, they didn't experience something new and extra. They lost something essential to humanity. They became less. We begin to lose our humanity. The more sin that we experience, the more of God's laws that we break, the less human we become. And it leads to all kinds of terrible things. Slavery. We don't think of slaves as people. We think of them as objects that we just order around. Would happily give the same order to a slave as we would to a robot. We think of them as being on the same level. They're no longer human in our eyes. Or psychopaths with their victims. It makes us less than what we are. And we now live in a world which is incredibly objectified. We objectify people all of the time. You walk onto university campuses today and you'll see students wearing t-shirts. It will say, I am a porn star on it. Well, when I went to university, if you pointed at a woman especially and said, you're a porn star, you'd be thrown out of the university. But now we want that badge of honor. We want to be objectified. We somehow feel it makes us bigger, better, greater, desired. We want to be desired. And so we're selling ourselves. Students around the world are very often taught how to market themselves at the end of their degree in order to get a good job. So we run courses for marketing people. We used to market cars and televisions and houses, but now we market people. We reduce people psychologically into an object. You're an object and someone needs to buy you or you need to sell yourself. Otherwise, you won't get anything. We're constantly reducing ourselves into objects. And here's the key thing. The relationship between two people, between a person and an object is different. The relationship between you and an object is one of consumption. You consume an object for your own satisfaction and pleasure. So if I were to take an apple and eat it, I'm consuming the apple to meet a need within me. The relationship between you and an object is one of consumption, but the relationship between two people should be one of connection. Even in the hippie movement of the 1960s, where they started sleeping with everybody, they at least understood that. They wanted to make a connection with someone else. But now we freely talk about consumption, which is why the porn industry has become such a huge, dominant thing in our culture. We're constantly trying to consume something to meet a need within us. And we're reducing people to objects around us, and we're using them. This is one of the most terrible things that could happen. If you're a person of influence or connection, and you feel that friends, people near you, are trying to use you, you hold them at a distance. You know you can't trust them. They're not trying to build a connection with you for relationship. They're interested in getting something from you. They're using you like an object, like a tool. And the simple truth is that when we feel used, we get angry. Even if we suppress it, we feel angry. And the amount of anger in our culture is going up. And I'd like to suggest to you that one of the reasons for that is we're so used to thinking of ourselves as objects and using other people as objects, that even though we're trying to celebrate it, inside we know there's something very wrong. And we're trapped. God designed this world for us to experience meaning in relationship. There should be something healthily addictive about good relationships. Let me say that again. There should be something healthily addictive about relationships. What do I mean by that? God is a person too. God wants us to have relationship with him. He wants us to desire relationship, connection with him, not consumption, not to use him, but to have relationship with him, to have fellowship with him. What happens if we break that fellowship with God? Well, in the Bible it says, as the deer pants for the water, so my soul longs for you. In other words, if you're in a good relationship with God and all of a sudden you stop spending time with him, you should miss it. There should be a desire, a hunger within you saying, I need this, I want this, I have to get back into this relationship. I have to spend time with you, God. I have to spend time with you, Jesus. I'm missing you. As the deer pants for the water, so my soul longs for you. And you're driven back to him on your knees and saying, I need you. But when we reduce people into objects, and we're simply trying to consume them through sexual activity and porn, we find the same pattern develop in our heart. And when we stop trying to watch porn, all of a sudden we have a feeling, but it's connected to the wrong thing. There's nothing wrong with the feeling, but it's connected to the wrong thing. And we feel desperate. I have to have this. I have to consume this. And we now live in a society that's so sexually imprisoned. You talk to anyone who watches a lot of pornography who doesn't, they'll say the same thing most of the time. They'll say, you know what, at the time I watch it, I feel like I can't stop myself. I feel like I can't say no. I have to say yes. It's like I'm totally overpowered. And so I watch it. And as soon as I finish consuming it, I feel terrible. I feel awful about it. And I feel so much shame and guilt. I say to myself, I'll never do this again. And at the time, when they're sat in front of their computer screen, or maybe walking out of whatever building they've been in, they honestly mean it. They're honestly in their heart. That's how they feel. How could I have done this? This is terrible. I feel awful. I will never do it again. And that feeling is powerful enough to stop them doing it for a while. But that feeling begins to wear off. And then after that, you begin to go the other way. You start thinking, well, maybe, just one more time. Just, and we begin to entertain all kinds of thoughts, and then we suddenly find ourselves back in that point of, I have to do this again. And then we repeat the pattern, and the shame and the guilt comes, and we feel terrible again. And we go round that cycle over and over and over again. The trouble is, the more times you go through it, the more meaningless the whole thing becomes. And eventually we feel that we're just powerless, that we can't do anything, that we can't break free. There's no way out of this. And so if I'm trapped in it, maybe I should try and enjoy it. And we throw ourselves into it. The trouble is that created things, even other people, were never designed to satisfy us. Created things in this world cannot satisfy the longings of our heart. Only God is big enough to do that. It is only when that longing is connected to Him, and we find it in Him, that He is actually able to meet it within us. Now, here's the incredible thing. When Jesus Christ came into this world, He came to break the bondage to sin in our life and set us free to worship Him. Set us free to have relationship with Him. It is possible to find freedom in the midst of all of this. But I can promise you something, ladies and gentlemen, you cannot do it on your own. It's impossible. If you are trapped in this kind of cycle of behavior and you're trying to do this on your own, it is impossible. You will never, ever do it. You know, I remember a while ago a friend of mine telling me about some survey that was done where they were doing MRIs in the brain. And they were looking at heroin addicts and the kind of chemistry that goes on in the brain when a heroin addict is craving heroin. If you take someone who has a form of sexual addiction, you do the same kind of MRI scan, you see a similar chemistry going on in the brain. Sometimes it's even more intense than a heroin addict feels. How many heroin addicts do you know who stop taking heroin by saying, oh, okay, I'm finished, and they just walk away? They need people around them. They need family. They need help. And you know what? If they get the right kind of help, they can stop. Here's the most incredible thing about Jesus Christ. He's come into this world to help set you free, and He's put you into a family. If you're sat here, your family, that family is called CCF. The reason why the Bible talks about confessing our sins one to another isn't so that the other person can absolve us. We're told to confess our sins one to another, to be accountable, and because in the power of that family and of that circle of trust, it can be broken. You need a small group, whether it's your regular small group or a distinct one, where you say, you know what, I really wrestle with this. This is one of my problems. I would love to be free from it. I've been trying for years and I just can't. And I often feel so ashamed. I need help. And when you find that community, when you find that kind of intimacy and closeness, it is possible to see it broken in your life. You can live differently. It is actually possible. Every year in the center we have in Oxford, we started talking about this a decade ago. And for the first few years, I used to run this group. And every year, I would have at least 60 to 70% of the students, when they heard that this was available, come and sit with me once a week in my study. And every year, they would always say the same thing. This isn't possible. I'm here because you've told me that you think it is possible for us to see a change in our life, but I'm not sure. I've tried so many times. I've been so disappointed. I'm so disillusioned. I've almost given up. One guy even said, I have given up. One guy said to me, look, here's what I've done, because I'm a Christian. He said, I used to watch 3 hours of pornography every day of the week, 7 days a week, 3 hours a day. But now I've become a Christian. I've cut down. I watch 3 hours of pornography twice a week. So I'm doing much better than I was before. It was 7 days a week, and now it's only 2 days a week. So, you know, God should be pleased with that. And it was amazing to be with him 6 months later. And for him to say, you know what, this is the first time I've been free of this. It's the first time in decades I've been free of this. The amazing thing is, in this church, there are groups which are being run. And as a matter of fact, I think material is going to come. And when I finish speaking, Pastor Paul's going to come back up here and tell you about it, which is designed to try and put you through the steps which are necessary to see you break free from this pattern in your life. Because it's imprisoned you. You are not free if you cannot stop doing what you want to stop. You're a prisoner. The trouble is, it's hard to see the walls of your prison when the cell is made of glass. And this has become so common in our culture, we don't see it anymore. We think we're free, but actually, we're living with anarchy inside our hearts. But even bigger than that group is that Jesus Christ came into this world, and part of his mission was to restore our humanity. Elsewhere in the Bible, it says that when we sin sexually, we sin against our own body. Literally, we're diminishing ourselves. It's harder for us to make relationships with people. It's hard to look at someone who you're attracted to and not reduce them into an object and think of consuming them. It's hard to actually make real friendship with people because the damage is so great. When Jesus Christ comes into our heart, into our life, he does three things. The first thing he does is he brings forgiveness. If you think Jesus doesn't know what's going in your heart and life right now, you're mistaken. God sees everything. He knows everything. So every video that you watched, every prostitute you may have visited, every person you slept with, you shouldn't have, he's seen it. He was actually there. So if you come to him and confess, hey, I've been doing this, he's not going to be surprised. He didn't go on holiday when you decided to do that. He's seen it. So when Jesus comes to each one of us and says, I'm willing to forgive you, he's not offering us forgiveness out of ignorance. He's offering us forgiveness out of knowledge. He knows exactly what we're caught up in. He knows exactly what we've been doing. And he loves us so much, he comes and says, look, I am offering you forgiveness. We talked earlier about the fact that we've broken God's law and we have broken lives as a result, and we live in a broken world. When Jesus Christ came into this world the night before he was betrayed, he took a loaf of bread and he said, this is my body broken for you. And Jesus Christ went to the cross and he was broken for us. The brokenness in our hearts, in our relationships, he took on into himself. He is broken for us. He has paid the price for what we have done so he can set us free. He is offering you freedom and forgiveness as a gift. It's the most incredible thing. One of the dangers when we talk about stuff like this is sometimes we can feel so unworthy that we think that we can't possibly respond. But he already knows where you are. That's why he came. He wants to restore it to you. He wants to restore you. He wants to give it to you. He wants to forgive you. Sometimes we can feel hard and think, forget it. I'm not even going to try. I'm just tired of that. Jesus is saying, you're going to have to trust me with this. Allow me to help you. And allow me to allow your family to help you. You can be free from this. It may be difficult, it may be hard, but it can be done. And he's offering you a family. He's offering to restore your humanity. He's offering to restore your relationship. And he's offering to completely change your heart. Because his desire through discipleship is to reattach that emotion. If you've sometimes prayed, God, take this desire I have for porn, for this sex, for sleeping around away from me, and you've wondered why God hasn't, the answer is he wants that desire to stay within you. He wants it attached to him. Does that make sense? Don't attach it to this other person, this other thing, this other. It's not the desire that needs to be taken away. The desire needs to be reattached to the right thing. Attach it to him today. Give yourself to him. This teaching that Jesus gives about adultery and the lust in our hearts, as hard as it is, the reason he speaks so strongly about it isn't because he's against us, it's because he's for us. He loves us. And he's saying, look, don't do this in the first place. Stop. It will be better for you to have no eyes, no hands, and no anything else and go and be with me in heaven rather than be locked in the hell of now and the hell forever. But it's not just a threat, it's a promise. Jesus Christ is offering you something better. There's a book which, if you haven't read, I would recommend. It's called A Better Story. It's written by what was one of England's leading clinical psychiatrists, who was head of psychiatry at the University of Bristol, I think. If you buy the book, you'll see his bio on the back. He starts off his book with the following illustrations. He says, if you're familiar with Greek myth, you will know the story of Odysseus. Odysseus was a guy who set off on a voyage. And when he set off on a voyage, he had all of these adventures. And one of the things he wanted to do was to listen to the sirens sing. Now, the sirens were these sort of female creatures that lived on this very dangerous island, and they were utterly beautiful, and their song was the most beautiful song in the world. And when ships would sail by the island, the sirens would sing their song. And the sailors would hear these women, these sirens singing, and they would steer their ship to the island to see them. And when they saw how beautiful they were, they would get even closer. And then the ship would shipwreck on the rocks, and everyone would drown, and the sirens would laugh at them as they watched them drown. And so they got their pleasure from seeing lives destroyed. But Odysseus, he wanted to hear them sing. So he told the sailors in his boat, he said, I want you to tie me to the mast. So they take ropes and chains and they tie him to the mast of the ship where the sail is, so he can't move. And then all the sailors, they put cotton wool in their ears and they bandage up their ears so they can't hear anything. So the sailors are now completely deaf. And Odysseus is tied to the mast, but his ears are open and they sail close to the island. Not so close as to get shipwrecked on the rocks, but close enough for him to see them and hear them. And the song starts to drive him insane. And he starts ordering his sailors, sail to the island, but they can't hear him. He starts threatening them, threatening their families, threatening their children. He's literally going insane as he listens to the song. And then eventually, when the sailors are far enough away from the island, they take all the wool out of their ears and they untie Odysseus, who's now just exhausted because he's been fighting against his restraints for so long, and he collapses on the boat. And he got to hear their song without destroying himself in the process. And very often when we hear Jesus Christ or talk about morality, especially sexual morality, we think that's what he's asking us to do, that we need to tie ourselves to a mast and not be driven insane. But actually, Jesus is offering us more than that. We do need restraint in the Christian faith, but there's another Greek myth about a guy called Orpheus. And Orpheus also decided to sail to that island. But Orpheus set out sail to that island, and when he got within hearing distance, he took out a harp and he played a more beautiful song than the song the siren sang, and the siren swam out to him. He played a better song. In Jesus Christ, we have a better story. We have a better story of how to live. Jesus is not somehow asking us to strap ourselves to some kind of mast and exhaust ourselves and almost go insane in the process and then collapse exhausted at the end. He is offering us a better story. He is singing a better song through the cross, through his cross. Through the cross of Jesus Christ is offering us forgiveness, peace, and the ability for a fresh start. And if you will accept his offer and listen to me carefully now, and put yourself in community where you can share and be accountable, because you are designed to be in relationship and family, he can change you and he can set you free. But I'm afraid you need both of those together. And that's what the offer is this morning. Now, this is a very sensitive topic, and so would like to give two parts to the response this morning. And so I'm just asking all of you, just for the respect of those around you, even if you're not planning to make any response this morning, just to take a moment just to close your eyes and bow your heads, even if you're not planning to make any kind of response. Because this is something which is very personal, and it has to start with you personally. But if you are sat here this morning and you would like me to pray for you, that you might know this freedom, and you're willing to come before Christ and say, Jesus, look, I'm just caught up in stuff right now. I need to be set free from it. And I'd like you to pray for me. Then I'm going to offer a prayer. And as your first step, as everyone else's eyes and head is bowed around you, I'd ask you just to raise your hand where you are as a sign before God to say, God, this has to be for me. This freedom, this thing that's being talked about, it has to be for me. Just on your own. Yes, okay, so I can see the hands going up around the room. So please just keep your eyes closed. Respect that privacy in people's life. And just pray. If you don't have your hand raised, then pray for those who do. And let's pray together. Lord, I want to pray for each person in this room who knows the brokenness and the imprisonment that comes from failure in this area. I thank you, Lord, that you love them, that you love me, that you laid down your life for us. Lord, that you're willing to forgive. And you're willing to restore. And Jesus, we need to know that forgiveness and that restoration. And Lord, put us on a path to make this meaningful and real, that we may not lose what we're starting here today. And we pray this in Christ's precious name. Amen. Okay, please do put your hand down. Now for stage 2. I'm going to invite Pastor Paul to come up, who will talk to you a little bit about what happens here in this family and what will be happening in small groups for you to continue the journey that you've already begun. One last thing I would urge you. If you did raise your hand this morning, I saw some couples raise their hands. I saw quite a lot of you up and down, men and women. If there is someone you are close to who you trust here this morning, try and share with them what happened this morning with them. Just share with them that this really spoke with me. And I'm wondering, could you be praying for me? God has put you in family. You're not alone. You were never meant to face this alone. He wants to change you and transform you in the context of that. And that's what Pastor Paul will come and talk to you now. Thank you, Paul. Bless you.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Michael.